Here's an interesting story. New audio tapes from the Apollo 10 mission reveal an eerie experience on the dark side of the moon.
That is music even sound on Spacey, doesn't it? You hear that whistling sound?
Over the course of an hour, they mention it multiple times. This is not just some anomaly. This is something that they're all really hearing, and it's really weird.
On the far side of the moon, where no voice from Earth can penetrate, 3 astronauts encountered a sound too eerie and unsettling to be anything ordinary.
Sounds like, outer space-time music. Boy, that sure is weird music. I'll tell you, John, that music is really weird.
Apollo 10 was meant to be a dress rehearsal for humanity's first lunar landing, but what the astronauts heard would go down as one of the most disturbing space mysteries ever recorded.
Boy, it got quiet, didn't it?
Decades later, the recordings surfaced, and that's what we're talking about today.
The radios in the 2 spacecraft were interfering with each other. They were on VHF, and there was a bit of radio interference, and that was the source of the sound.
The Apollo 10 mission. On May 18, 1969, a towering Saturn V rocket roared to life at Kennedy Space Center, carrying Apollo 10 into the sky. Officially, it was only a rehearsal, a dress run for Apollo 11, a chance to test the spacecraft, the crew, and every maneuver that would soon make history. But what no one could have predicted was that this mission, meant to prove NASA was ready for the moon, would stumble into one of the strangest and most unsettling mysteries of the space age. What the crew heard in the void of space would linger in whispers for decades. A sound so eerie that when they first spoke of it, almost no one believed them. The 3 men chosen to carry out this critical test were Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan. All were veterans, carefully selected for their precision under pressure. Stafford, the commander, had a reputation as a calm strategist. Young, the command module pilot, was sharp, steady, and known for his dry humor. And Cernan, the lunar module pilot, carried with him the restless energy of a man not afraid of danger. Together, they were handed a mission that came with both honor and enormous risk: fly to the moon, test the spacecraft in lunar orbit, and bring it back safely. Their spacecraft carried 2 distinct vehicles. The command module, Charlie Brown, would remain in orbit, while the lunar module, Snoopy, would separate and descend close to the lunar surface. At one point, Stafford and Cernan guided Snoopy within 50,000 feet of the gray cratered ground below, rehearsing the maneuvers that Armstrong and Aldrin would soon execute for real. It was thrilling and dangerous work. A single mistake could have stranded them forever in lunar orbit. But the systems worked, the descent went as planned, and soon Snoopy climbed back up to rejoin Charlie Brown. By all accounts, Apollo 10 was unfolding flawlessly. They had already traveled farther from Earth than any humans in history, over 254,000 nautical miles. At that distance, Earth was reduced to a glowing marble hanging in blackness. The silence of space pressed against the windows. Every heartbeat of the mission seemed perfectly controlled. But perfection in space can be deceptive, because beyond the calm of mission control, something else was waiting. And it would appear in the one place no one on Earth could hear them. As Apollo 10 rounded the far side of the moon, all radio contact with Earth was cut off. The crew knew this blackout would come, but even expecting it could not dull the weight of the silence. On that hidden side of the moon, there are no transmissions, no reassuring voices from Houston, and no tether to home. The astronauts were utterly alone, sealed in a fragile shell of metal as the lunar landscape drifted silently below. It was there, in that blackout, that they heard it. Through the headsets came a sound no one had warned them about. A high-pitched whistling, eerie and insistent, filled their ears in the void where silence should have reigned. It pulsed in strange rhythms, rising and falling as though the vacuum of space itself was humming. The noise was unlike static or ordinary interference. It had a tone, a character, and a strange melodic edge. Eugene Cernan's voice broke the stillness. He said to the others, "Boy, that sure is weird music." His words were half a laugh, almost like a nervous reflex, but they carried a chill, because what they were hearing didn't sound like a background hiss. It sounded alive. John Young's reply came quickly. "Nobody will believe us." His words hung heavier than he might have intended, because in that moment, the 3 men knew that if they reported something too strange, or something that sounded like a hallucination, it could cost them everything. Inside NASA, the pressure on astronauts was immense. Every pilot wanted to keep flying. Every pilot wanted a chance at the moon, and every pilot knew the unspoken rule.
One small step for man, one I sleep for mankind.
You never admitted weakness. Psychologists examined their records closely, and any hint of instability could ground a career. If you confessed to hearing voices or music in the silence of space, you risked being judged unfit. So the crew of Apollo 10, seasoned professionals all, kept their calm. They joked lightly about the music, but in their voices there was unease. They logged the event, but they did not linger on it. The moon held its silence, and eventually, their orbit carried them back into contact with Earth. But once you have heard something inexplicable, you cannot simply unhear it. For years, the record of that moment lay buried in NASA's archives, not hidden out of malice, but stored as part of the immense body of Apollo data. In 1973, 4 years after the mission, the transcripts were declassified, and then, decades later in 2012, the audio itself was digitized and released. The world finally heard what Stafford Young and Cernan had heard. The strange whistling tones, the casual but uneasy banter of the crew, and Cernan's chilling remark, "That sure is weird music." But there was one more twist. Before Apollo 11 launched, Michael Collins, the man who would orbit the moon while Armstrong and Aldrin descended, was quietly told about the eerie music Apollo 10 had heard on the far side of the moon. Collins later admitted he was prepared for it. He knew that as he circled alone, cut off from Earth, he might hear something that did not make sense. In his book, Carrying the Fire, An Astronaut's Journeys, he confessed, "Had I not been warned about it, it would have scared the hell out of me." He was not afraid, but he was aware. That knowledge followed him on every orbit of the far side, where the silence pressed in, and only the instruments kept him company. But what really happens in that shadowed domain, where no one can hear you? The far side of the moon is unlike any other place Apollo astronauts encountered. Because the moon is tidally locked, the same face always points toward Earth. The far side remains hidden, its craters and mountains unseen from the ground below. When Apollo 10 slipped behind that horizon, they were entering a realm no human eye on Earth could ever watch in real time. It was a place of silence, shadow, and complete disconnection. This isolation carried a psychological weight. Astronauts are trained to remain calm, but the knowledge that you are beyond all contact has a way of pressing on the mind. In those long minutes, the Earth was blocked by hundreds of miles of rock. If disaster struck, no one would know until the spacecraft reappeared. To hear something strange and inexplicable during that silence only magnified the tension. It was not only the absence of Earth's voice, it was the presence of something else. But the context of the time made the event even more unsettling. This was the height of the Cold War, when secrecy and suspicion surrounded every new development in space. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race for dominance, and information was guarded closely. NASA's astronauts carried that atmosphere with them. They knew that any unusual report might be filtered through layers of caution, or even kept quiet to avoid public alarm. In such a climate, a strange sound on the far side of the moon could be more than a curiosity. It could be seen as a potential weakness, or even a risk to national security. Apollo 10's reports of space music were a mystery born in this hidden half of the moon, where silence was expected, but something else was waiting. Was it truly alien music, or something far more ordinary, dressed in the clothing of mystery? Alien music? When the Apollo 10 astronauts first joked about hearing weird music on the far side of the moon, the remark might have seemed lighthearted, but the longer you sit with that phrase, the more unsettling it becomes. The idea of music in space, in a place where radio silence should reign, sounds less like a glitch and more like a message. Perhaps a whisper meant for ears that weren't supposed to be there. Years later, Apollo 15 astronaut Al Worden was asked about the possibility of space music in a television documentary. Though he hadn't been part of Apollo 10, his answer cast a disturbing shadow on the events that happened on that mission. In his own words, "Logic tells me that if there was something recorded on there, then there was something there." Worden words carried a blunt truth. In an environment as empty as space, sounds do not come from nowhere. To many, this comment was almost like a confirmation. The astronauts had heard something real, and whatever it was, deserved attention. The sense of unease surrounding Apollo 10 only grew when the Science Channel revived the story. On NASA's unexplained files, viewers heard the actual recordings, the high-pitched whistling tones echoing through the astronauts' headsets. The network paired the audio with dark imagery and dramatic narration, fanning speculation about extraterrestrial contact. Millions of people who had never read an Apollo transcript were suddenly hearing the strange tones for themselves. And when they did, the theories came quickly. The most popular was also the most provocative. Could the Apollo 10 crew have intercepted an alien transmission? The far side of the moon, after all, is hidden from Earth. No ground-based antenna can peer through its bulk. If an advanced civilization wanted to set up a beacon or even a base, it would be the perfect location. Shielded from Earth's signals, silent to our telescopes, but not to the spacecraft that dared to circle overhead. The astronauts themselves described what they heard as music, and that word gave the sound a human-like quality, as if someone or something had intended it. From there, the speculation widened. Some enthusiasts connected the space music with reports of strange anomalies seen on the lunar surface during Apollo missions. Photographs that seemed to show lights where none should exist, shadows that looked like towers or domes, and patterns that some claimed resembled artificial structures. These images became entwined with the mystery of Apollo 10, fueling the speculation that this eerie sound they heard was not an isolated event, but part of a larger pattern of the moon hiding secrets in plain sight. Another haunting speculation came from people who believed that the music's explanation might not lie with aliens but with rivals back on Earth. The Soviets had already stunned the world by launching Sputnik, sending the first human into orbit, and landing robotic probes on the moon. And so, some theorists asked, could Soviet technology have been responsible for what Apollo 10 heard? Perhaps a stray transmission, or even an intentional attempt to disrupt American communications. No evidence has ever surfaced to prove this, but the political climate of the time made such ideas believable enough to linger. The sound was real. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't a story passed down through rumor. It was recorded, logged, and later released. The voices of Stafford, Young, and Cernan captured the moment in real time. Their surprise genuine, their unease audible. These weren't ordinary men making wild claims. They were elite pilots, trusted with one of the most dangerous missions in history. And if they heard something, then perhaps something was truly there. To date, the eerie sound retains a strange power. People who listen to the recordings describe a chill, an instinctive sense that they're eavesdropping on something not meant to be heard. And while scientists have offered their explanations, the mystery remains hard to shake. But if what they heard wasn't alien music, then what was it really? What natural technical explanation could produce a sound so strange that even seasoned astronauts called it music in the void? The real scientific explanation. The eerie tones that echoed through Apollo 10's headsets seemed like they belonged to another world. Yet the answer, as scientists would later confirm, came not from hidden forces on the moon, but from the spacecraft themselves, caught in a moment of unintended harmony. Both Apollo spacecraft, the command module Charlie Brown and the lunar module Snoopy, were equipped with VHF radios. These radios allowed the astronauts to communicate with one another when the two vehicles were separated in lunar orbit. The problem was that both systems operated in similar frequency bands. According to NASA scientists, when they were switched on at the same time and the modules were in close proximity, their signals could overlap and interact, and the result was an odd feedback loop, producing a whistling or musical tone inside the astronauts' headsets. To anyone unprepared for it, the effect could sound almost otherworldly. But in technical terms, it was no more mysterious than two radio stations accidentally bleeding into each other on Earth. When electromagnetic signals cross paths in certain ways, they can generate strange harmonics. In Apollo 10's case, that harmonic interaction created the eerie whistling that Stafford, Young, and Cernan described as music. But this phenomenon isn't unique to Apollo. Decades later, NASA's Cassini spacecraft detected similar effects while orbiting Saturn. Instruments designed to measure electromagnetic waves picked up unusual fluctuations in the planet's magnetosphere. When those radio emissions were converted into audio frequencies, they produced strange and sometimes musical tones. To a casual listener, the recordings from Cassini sound unsettlingly alive, like a chorus echoing through space. Yet they are entirely natural, the product of charged particles and electromagnetic fields. This distinction between sound as we know it and the audio signals captured by spacecraft is important. In the vacuum of space, sound cannot travel in the way it does on Earth. There is no air and no medium for vibrations to carry through. What astronauts and probes detect are radio waves and electromagnetic energy that can be translated into sound by their equipment. And so, the space music of Apollo 10 was not sound floating through the void, but an electronic artifact of two radio systems crossing signals in an environment that offered no outside noise to drown it out. Surprisingly, NASA did not treat the Apollo 10 audio as an alien mystery. Internally, the explanation was straightforward. Engineers immediately understood that the overlapping VHF transmissions created the effect, and the astronauts themselves were briefed on it before later missions. When NASA's Juno spacecraft made its first flybys of Jupiter, its instruments detected powerful radio emissions generated by the planet's immense magnetic field. Scientists converted these emissions into audio, and the result was a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to vibrate through the speakers. The sounds were not caused by air or vibration, but by charged particles trapped in Jupiter's magnetosphere, moving in ways that created intense bursts of radio energy. To the human ear, the translation was unsettling, as if the giant planet itself were groaning. But there's more. The Voyager probes, launched in the 1970s, also recorded something extraordinary. As they crossed the boundary into interstellar space, their plasma wave instruments picked up vibrations in the thin, ionized gas between the stars. When these were shifted into audible frequencies, the data became a series of rising tones, almost like the sound of distant winds. The recordings marked humanity's first hearing of interstellar plasma, giving a sensory impression of a region no human will reach for many generations. Closer to Earth, astronauts aboard the International Space Station have spoken about strange noises too. Inside the station, pressurized modules sometimes creak, pop, or hum. These sounds are normal thermal expansion, pumps and fans running, or metal adjusting as the station moves between sunlight and shadow. To a newcomer, they can sound eerie, but to the crew, they're the background rhythm of life in orbit. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen.